Hi and welcome back to Carlos Cooks. Today we're going to be making sourdough bread. Now sourdough bread, I don't know if you heard about it, but it is a slightly different bread to normal bread in that it's made with a yeast culture you make yourself rather than using a dry packet yeast or a fresh yeast that you may have got from your local baker. And it's this starter that gives it its unique sour taste, and sourdough bread is beautiful. And so I'm going to show you how to make that today, but what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to make the starter itself, which takes quite a while. Sourdough bread is not a quick bread. If you're impatient, it's not the bread for you. It takes a long time to make it. Your starter can take anything up to 2 weeks before you can use it properly to make the bread. So it's not for those people who haven't got any patience. And then I'm going to show you how to mix the dough and get it ready for an overnight bulk fermentation. We're actually shooting early evening here, so it's just coming up for 7:30 now. So we're going to make the dough up, we're going to put it in this bowl, and we're going to leave it overnight proving. Hopefully it'll come up to double the size by the morning, and then I'll continue shooting to show you how to knock that back, shape it and put it in the proofing basket and eventually bake it. But obviously there's going to be a delay between shootings on this video because it takes a long time. So first off, I'm going to show you how to make the starter. Okay, so this is my starter, and I've been feeding it religiously every day. And when I say religiously, yes, you have to feed it religiously every day at the same time with the same amounts. It is like a pet, and it will get sick if you forget to feed it, and you will have to help it recover. So what my starter is based on is 100 grams of strong white bread flour and 100 mils of water. You mix it, put it in a jar. Up to you whether you close the lid or leave an air gap. Different people have different results with it. I usually leave the lid closed for a day and then maybe it's open for the next day. Things like that. I do find it ferments a bit better. And you continue doing that. Same time every day. Same equal amounts of flour and water. Tepid water out the tap is best. And you keep going. Around day 3 or 4, you're going to start to notice bubbles on the surface. It means fermentation's happening, good things are going on, and you're on the right track, and it should get better over time as you feed it. So around day 3 or 4, you're going to be coming up to the over halfway mark of your jar. And what you've got to do then is you've got to throw half of it away. You've got to tip half of it away down the sink or in the bin, wherever you want to get rid of it, sort of reducing the size of it, and then you continue feeding again. And you may find you have to do that twice over a 2-week period to keep the size, keep it within the size of your jar. I've done it twice over the 20-day period I've had this running. I've had a couple of days where it didn't look like a lot was going on in there, so I boosted it, and how I've done this is I've swapped the white flour on one day for a whole wheat flour. You can use rye as well, and what you'll find is that really helps feed it, and it'll bring it to life. It's especially good if the weather's a bit cold, your kitchen's a bit cold, you've not got the warmth in there to help this culture grow. So this is where we are on day 20. I've split it into 2 jars. I fed it about 3-4 hours ago to give it a boost before we use it for baking. That's usually best. And what you're looking for is you're looking for an increase in volume. So around 4 o'clock, 3-4 hours ago today, I put this plaster on to show where the level of the starter was in the jar. I don't know if you can see that, but we've got a good 1.5 inch, 3/4 of growth in there, almost double. So as long as it's going in that direction, that's ready to use for baking. Ideally you're looking for double, but I know this is quite an age starter for baking, 20 days, so it's going to be fine. And I have done a test bake about 3 or 4 days ago that came out fine, just to make sure that the starter had enough oomph in it to get the bread to rise, because you're not putting any other yeast in this mixture. This is all that is going to make your bread puff up and rise, both in the bowl and when you put it in the oven, that kick. But it's all natural goodness. You've made all of the ingredients pretty much yourself. Your yeast culture is just flour and water and thyme, lots of thyme. You're going to put flour, you're going to put salt, and you're going to put a bit of brown sugar in your dough mixture, and that is it. There's no additives, there's no preservatives. That's why this bread is going to taste a million times better than anything you can buy in the supermarket. I make it with a strong white bread flour. Some people like to do part strong white, part strong whole wheat. If you can get it, unbleached flour will be the best. That will give you the best results and the best flavour. So that's our starter. Now, as I said, we will be making the mixture up. I'll be mixing it by hand. This is going to be a pure artisan loaf, no machinery involved. And then it's going to go back into this bowl. We're going to cover it with cling film with a dusting of flour over the dough underneath so it doesn't stick. And it will stay overnight on my side. And tomorrow morning it should have doubled in size, if not more. And that's when it's ready to knock back, shape, and put into our proofing basket, a Banneton. That's this traditional sourdough basket. You don't have to use one of these. You can proof it in anything you have available, as long as you can tip it out onto your baking surface, whatever you're baking it on or in. These baskets, they're very cheap to buy. They're very sturdy. They last a long time. One trick with them is you never wash them. You never put them in water. Once you've used these, to get rid of the flour, I use a sort of a dishwashing brush with the hard bristles, and I just brush it all out. And in the, it's over 2 years I've had these now. I have never washed them, but as long as you do that, they will stay clean, they will stay germ-free. And but washing them is a really bad idea because it will make your dough stick to it, that it will not come out. So it's best to steer clear of that. So tomorrow morning we're going to knock that dough back. We're going to put it in here, seam side up. We're going to make a ball out of it with the seam side up, so the shiny side goes down into this part of the bowl. Good coating of flour before we do that, to stop it from sticking. Some people use rice flour. They find they get better results with that. It doesn't stick at all and it's easy to get out. I don't have any problems with normal flour, but I do put a good dusting in there. And then it'll sit in that, once again with a bit of cling film over, for around, it usually takes about 4 hours. So by midday I should be getting the oven on to get this into the oven tomorrow. And then it's just a question of getting a plate. I put a bit of baking paper on that plate. I'll put the plate onto this, tip it over, tip it out. It will come out quite easily. The next thing I do then is I normally, I've got a small sort of baker's brush. I very gently brush the excess flour off of the sourdough because it will go everywhere in your oven. And it also, once it comes to eating the bread, you don't want that excess flour all over the pieces of bread that you're eating. So it's a good idea just to dust the remainder off. We're then going to put some baker's cuts in it to help it split open as it springs in the oven and starts baking. May even use some scissors because you can do some nice designs with scissors as well that make it really look nice. And it goes into an oven. I cook it in one of these. This is a cast iron Dutch oven. Very heavy. And because it's quite shallow, my one, you can get deeper ones, but mine are quite shallow, and I find the bread, it restricts the height of the bread if I leave the lid on, so I actually bake it with the lid off. But a lot of people have deeper versions and they bake with the lid on, probably for around 30 minutes with the lid on, then the last 10 minutes without it. But mine bakes completely with it off. I put a little bit of water in a bowl on the base of the oven. That helps create some steam, which all helps the baking process. And it goes into I preheat the oven normally to around 230 degrees centigrade with the cast iron pot in it. And then when it's time for baking, probably the first 20 minutes I'll leave it at that temperature and then turn down to about 210 for the last 20 minutes or 10 minutes. 20 minutes, sorry. And then the bread will be done, and it's not long. You can just pull it out with the paper, put it on a cooling rack. So that's the pot I use. Now, if you haven't got one of these, don't despair. You can bake on a normal baking tray as long as you can get that dough out of whatever receptacle you're proving it in onto that baking tray with some greaseproof or baking paper on it. That's fine. And an even better idea is a pizza stone if you have one. Once again, put that in the oven as you're preheating your oven and let it get really hot. Take that out and slip your paper with your bread onto that and bake it on that, and that will really help it kick in the oven as well. So many options open to you. What I can advise you to do is have a look on some of the social media platforms, because there are a lot of groups, specific sourdough baking groups on there that have some wonderful tips for making all sorts of things with sourdough bread. Believe it or not, the starter can be used for making English style muffins, scones, rolls, pancakes, you name it. There are loads of things you can make with this starter, just not bread on its own. So don't worry that it's going to make loads of it and you're never going to be able, you will find a use for it. So let's kick off now then. Let's start weighing out the ingredients, get them into the bowl, start mixing, and then we'll hit the kneading process. So for this, I'm making one large loaf that is going to fit inside that proofing basket, that Banneton. And we need 500 grams of flour for that. Just bear with me, I've just got to get the scales on the right setting. Right, we're zeroed out. So this is the flour I'm using. It's just a strong white bread flour. This particular company that I use, Artisan's, I find I get really good results from their flour. And they do a Canadian version of the strong white flour as well, that for some reason it's a different type of wheat, and that's really good, I find. So 500 grams of that. Nearly there. Here we go. So that goes into our mixing bowl. Make sure we're zeroed out. And now 300 grams. So 500 grams flour, 300 grams of your starter. And I'll try and pour this slowly so you can see the consistency of it, how sort of gloopy and puffy it is. You can see that's just not flour and water mixed. There's things alive in there, good things that are going to make this bread come out lovely. So we just have to slow down a little bit because we don't want to go over the 300 grams if we can help it. It's almost like a porridge consistency. So I don't know if you can see that, but you can see as I lean the bowl forward, you can see the stretchiness of it. Even though it's a slight liquid, you can see the texture there, and that's what you're looking for. And if you smell it, you'll get that. It's almost a beery sort of alcohol-y smell. Depending on the flours you're using, you'll get a different smell. But it's going to smell yeasty, boozy sort of smell to it when it's working well. If something goes wrong with your starter, it'll start to smell like paint thinners or something like that, and usually that's a sign something's gone wrong along the way. Maybe you forgot to feed it for a couple of days or something like that, and you're probably going to have to throw it away and start again. But this is smelling good. And you can see by the colour of it, you can see that I have added whole wheat flour into my feeding process. That would be a lot paler in colour if it was just white flour. Let's go get this last bit out. Don't leave any behind. Okay. And then all that's left is 2 teaspoons of a nice fine sea salt and 2 teaspoons of brown sugar, fine brown sugar, not a demerara that's got thick crystals in it if you can, just a fine brown sugar. And that goes in the other side of the bowl, away from the yeast for a moment, because we don't want it to kill it. And then all that's needed is water, tepid water, room temperature, maybe slightly warmer. Now this recipe normally uses about 250 mils, but I found that was a bit dry, so I've increased it slightly today. Got about 260 mils in here, and all of that goes in. And we make some room to bring this all together. And what we're just going to do at the beginning is we're just going to spin the bowl and pull away from the sides into the middle. Now, it is perfectly all right if you don't want to go through this 20-minute ordeal of mixing this by hand and getting it to a consistency where you're going to get a good loaf, to put it in the mixer with a bread dough hook and do it in there on a slow speed. Perfectly fine. The results are hardly going to be any different, but mixing it by hand, you can at least say it's a total artisan loaf then. No machinery's been involved, so it's up to you really. Now this method that I'm using for mixing this dough is just the same method I would use if I was making a normal bread dough. It's the same method that we used to make breads in the bakery I used to work in years ago. But there are many other ways of making sourdough bread. There are loads of different methods. So once you get confident, start investigating and having a look on the internet, because you will find so many different ways to prepare your dough for proving. There are loads of methods where you can mix the dough, you leave it for a while, for about an hour, you come back and then you fold. You make 4 to 6 folds in it, outside to inside, spin the bowl, outside to inside, and then you leave it for another half hour, and then you do it again. You leave it for another half an hour and you do it again. You can do that like 6 or 8 times. And what you're doing is you're just doing a different type of mix where you're getting air into the dough, and it'll probably give you a less tighter crumb at the end of it. If you do methods like that, you'll get a lot more air into it, so you get a more traditional looking sourdough loaf. Right, so this has come together now. All the ingredients have come out of the bowl, so it's now time for me to get my hands dirty. So I'm going to, first off, I'm going to just give it a few turns in the bowl, I'm just spinning the bowl round and I'm just kneading it in the bowl, and this is just going to get the remnants of the flour and dough off the walls of the bowl, clean it up a little bit, and then we'll put a little bit of flour on our work surface here and we'll continue on that. But we've got a nice dough here and it's got a good hydration level, and you do want that because you don't want it to be dry. More moisture in it, it'll stay fresher longer and you'll get a better crumb, better texture to the bread. So let's just make sure we get all that off. Just a little bit of flour. Not too much flour, just enough to stop it from sticking, because you don't want this to absorb more flour and get rid of the hydration that you've already got in it. Right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to get the dough, give it a good coating of flour like that, and then elongate it, and we're just going to push it away from ourselves and roll it back like that whilst holding the other end, and that's it. Turn it 90 degrees again and start again. 90 degrees and again. Just holding with your fingers this end of the dough so it doesn't disappear from you. 90 degrees again. And you can see after just a few goes already the difference in the texture of the dough. So just bring your flour in on the board and just keep going as quick as you can manage it, and be quite firm. The firmer you are, the better, because what you're trying to do here is develop the gluten. And what you're looking for is a stretchiness in your dough that doesn't necessarily break it. So what we'll do periodically is we'll stop, we'll stretch the dough out at one end and make it as thin as we can and see how it breaks. And what we're looking for is a sort of smooth stretch where it doesn't break immediately and leave a big hole. And that means the gluten's been developed. And that happens a lot better the firmer you are with it. Now what you'll find is you very quickly absorb that flour, but don't be tempted to put any down extra if you can help it. Unless it really starts sticking to the board. You get quite a good workout doing this. Believe it or not, back in my early 20s when I worked in my mother's and father's bakery, I was quite a skinny man from working in the bakery, despite eating a lot of the delicacies we made there. Right, that's starting to stick a bit too much now. We lost, you can see we've got remnants of the dough sticking to the board. So we're going to give it another fine dusting of flour, just a little bit, just enough to stop that from sticking. That's it. We're just doing this through this mixing process. Right, so if I just stretch it out a little bit like that with my knuckles, imagine that's sitting in your bowl and you've left it for an hour. What you do is you stretch and fold in, turn the bowl, stretch and fold in, turn the bowl. Do that about 4 times, leave it for another half an hour. After that half an hour, this dough would have rested again, it would be flatter again in the bowl, and you do the process again, and you keep doing that, spinning it in the bowl and folding it like that, like a parcel. And the more times you do that, the dough will develop, the gluten gets stretched, the dough has time to recover from that stretching process, and you will get a better loaf out of it in the end. But we'll continue with what we're doing until we get to where we want to be. And there's a nice colour to this dough. You can see the wheat flakes in it from the whole wheat flour that was in the starter. So all that goodness has gone into your loaf. It's starting to stick again. And all the time I'm doing this, pretty much with every turn I'm making, you can feel the dough is starting to feel smooth. You know, as the gluten's developing, the dough's getting to where we need it to be. So once again, we'll do something different now. It's very early. I can tell from the dough and how it feels working it in my hands that it's nowhere near ready yet. But what you would do when you think you're close to that point is you would hold it up and you just sort of manipulate it in your hands like you're holding a pizza and just start moving it out to make the circle bigger. And then eventually when you get it a bit thinner, you just sort of manipulate it in your hands and stretch it out. And as you can see there, you're starting to get a thinner area where the light comes through, but it will break, and it's not a smooth break at all, so that means this dough is definitely not ready. It needs a lot more work. Now, I personally have not made any other products with my starter yet. They are on my list of things to do, and the things I do want to try, I definitely want to try making English muffins, because Apparently that doesn't involve an oven at all. You do it on a sort of hot griddle pan on the stove top. And they do look beautiful when they come out, so definitely going to give those a go next. Another thing I've done with the dough is added some other flavours. There's a lot of recipes online once again and on the social media channels where people show you how to add other things to the doughs. Everything from cheese and herbs. I've even seen chocolate and nut ones. One favourite of my family is caraway seed. So very close to the end of mixing, we would add caraway seed in and do a few turns on the board to mix that caraway seed in, because that has a lovely aniseed flavour and it really goes nice. Right, we're not far off now, it's coming on very well. I can feel the dough getting smoother. This probably would have taken about 5 minutes in a stand mixer. So we'll check that again. Yeah, we've got a lot more elasticity in there now. You can feel it as you work it through your hands. There's a bit more stretchiness to it now without it breaking. Starting to stick a little bit again now. Should be the last one we'll need. Yeah, it's sticking to the board. This is going to be the last minute or so we'll need on this. I think it's come together nicely. It's got a lot more elasticity in it. Try and get that dough off the board. You can see it looks a lot smoother as I roll it now, so we know that's going to look good when we make it into a ball. And that's very easy. You know, you can just, you sort of move it away on the board and bring it back with your other hand whilst rotating it like that. So push it into the board and bring it forward with your left hand and back with your right, like that. Push it into the board as you're doing it, and that'll form a nice ball of dough for you with your seam underneath. Just close that up if you want to. Just tighten that up a little bit more, and that is ready now to sit and grow to at least twice its size. So what we're going to do is take our mixing bowl that we used earlier. We're going to put some flour in the bottom so it doesn't stick, just a bit like so. We're going to put our dough in there, shiny side up this time because we're going to knock it back and shape it. Sprinkle a little bit of flour on the top and then rub it in to try and get an even coating over the surface, and this will just make sure as it comes up it won't stick to the cling film. Okay, so that's that part. Cling film over the top. Stretch and seal it all round. Now once again, ideally the warmest place you've got overnight in your kitchen. It's very warm and very humid here today, so that is going to be fine on my top of my oven overnight, and when I come down in the morning that should be almost at the top of the bowl and ready for the next stage. So join me for that tomorrow morning, and we'll finish the loaf off, leave it for its final proof, and then bake it, and then get it out and have a look and see what it looks like inside. So I'll see you later on. Good morning everyone. It's time for stage 2 of our sourdough bread making. So if you remember, yesterday we made the dough with our starter and we left it proving overnight in a large mixing bowl covered with cling film. And overnight it has more than doubled in size. You can see it's quite a large amount of proved up dough in the bowl, so we can see that the starter has worked wonderfully. It's done what we needed. So this second stage now is to take that out as gently as we can, and we're going to form it into a bowl, put it in our proofing basket, and then in maybe 2 to 3 hours, maybe quicker, depending on how active it still is, it'll come up in the proofing basket, and then we can switch to stage 3 where we're going to tip it out and put it in the oven and bake it. So let's get this out. Put the cling film to one side because I'm going to use it. Now normally I would use a dough scraper. I'm going to put a picture on screen of what a dough scraper looks like. Small plastic implement, very thin, sort of that shape. And it's the ideal thing for scraping dough off of your work surface or getting dough out of a bowl gently. I've misplaced mine. I have hunted high and low and I can't find it anywhere. So we're going to have to make other plans. I'm going to try and get it out with my hands. Now sometimes it's best to just wet your fingers so they don't stick to the dough if you're trying to get it out. But we're going to put a little bit of flour, not much, because we don't want to make it difficult to work this into the shape we want, but we're just going to put a light dusting just so that we don't get it sticking. And I'm just going to wet my fingers with some cold water. And then, using my fingers in place of the dough scraper, you just want to gently break it away from the sides of the bowl. It has stuck a little bit because we didn't put enough flour on the sides, but it should be okay. So we're just breaking it away from the sides as best we can, just to loosen it. And it smells very yeasty, so hopefully with a little bit of coaxing this will come out. There we go. It is very sticky. Let's just get on top of that flour a bit so that we can manipulate it a bit. Right, it is quite sticky, that, so I'm going to give it a dusting of flour just over the top, very light. Just to make it workable. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to fold sides into the middle like that, and then we're going to switch it round and bring that into the middle, and then switch it round again into the middle, and then the last one. And what you can do now is put it over, so the seam side down, and very gently do what we did yesterday and just bring it together into a ball. Use the flour on the work surface. That needs a little bit more because it is, we've got quite a well hydrated dough here, so it should produce a very nice loaf with a very nice crumb. But we're not going to tighten the ball up, we're just going to get the shape we want and hopefully just seal it underneath. Like so. So that should be sufficient. We've got some air bubbles here, we just want to get rid of those because so like that. And what I've done to the Banneton proofing basket is I've given it a really good coating of flour, you know, just sort of spun it round over the sink and give it a really good coating everywhere, and you have to, because we don't want that sticking in there because it needs to come out of there very easily. So, you know, don't spare the flour, give it a really good coating. If you're using the rice flour, you'll probably get better results because it's a lot grainier, but we definitely don't want anything sticking in there to the sides, especially as it comes up. So make sure you've got a really good coating. I've got a very small baker's pastry brush. That's fallen down a little bit. We'll put a bit more in. I've got a very small baker's pastry brush that I use to dust excess flour off before I put it into the oven. So I'm not worried about overuse of flour here, I'm more worried about it sticking. So let's just give that another couple of turns to make sure it comes off the surface nicely, and then seam side up, so flip it over and seam side up into the bowl, just like that. Okay, so I'm just going to dust this flour off the top here, and you can use a little bit just to that you've got left on your work surface, just to give it a little coating on top, just so the top doesn't stick to the cling film as it comes up. So just very gently, just make sure you've got that coated over there like that. Right, we'll reuse our cling film from last night. Just cover that over. You're not going to get it to cling and stick to this bowl at all, but it's just place it over it just to keep a little bit of the warm air in there to help it come back up in the basket, which shouldn't take long. I'm looking at this, and this dough looks quite feisty, so I'm not expecting that to take 2 hours, 3 hours at all. So just put that to one side on the oven. And leave that like that for now. But one thing we've got to do this morning is we've got to feed the starter that I had yesterday, because we've used a considerable amount of it. I've got 2 jars on the go. And as you can see, if I hold that up to the camera, you can see this one has got a lot of air bubbles on the top. It's been fermenting well overnight. It's got a good sort of gloopy, yeasty consistency and a boozy, yeasty smell as well. So that's definitely ready for a feed. So we're just going to get the scales. And we're going to put 100 grams of flour into that. Just use the last of this one pack up. And then I've got another one in here. So I'll feed these, they'll be ready to bake again if I wanted to, or wanted to do something slightly different. But if you find that you're making too much starter and you could do with a break from baking, or you just want to hold off for a week, you can put this in the fridge and it will put it in a sort of like a stasis. And I've known people keep it for quite some time in the fridge on hold, so you don't have to feed it when it's in the fridge. You can just keep it in there and it will just hold it back. and then bring it out of the fridge, let it get up to room temperature, feed it again, and you'll wake it back up. Now, I personally have not done that for longer than sort of 5 to 7 days, but I have always managed to get it to come back. So I have heard people do it supposedly for a month in the fridge. So, you know, don't feel that because you're making this starter you've got to continually bake every couple of days or every day. You can have a rest by putting it in the fridge and holding it in there for a while. And if you want to stop at all, you know, from making starter, you can do that as well. Because, as I said, I got my starter from scratch this year, ready to bake a loaf within just over 2 weeks. So, you know, you can start from scratch again and wait for 2 weeks and you'll have something that you can use. So, you know, all is not lost, but it is best to keep your starter going continually. The longer you keep it going, the better. There are tales of year-old starters on the internet that you can buy a small amount of, where they've been feeding it for years and years and years and years and years, and it will get better. That yeast gets better over time, so your starter will improve with time. So if you can keep it going all winter somehow, and you know, right through to the next year, do that, because you'll get a much better loaf. So next up, 100 mils of water. So 100 ml into that one. Exactly 100 ml into that one. And now the next thing to do is to give them a really good stir. I sometimes start them off with a sort of dessert spoon like this, just gently to mix the flour and the water into what's already in the jar. So an initial stir like that, then I'll finish it off with this wooden spatula in a minute, just to get everything off the sides a bit better. So as I say, I'm really keen to try and make the oven top sourdough muffins, so that's probably what I'm going to try next after this, because I've never made those before, so I shall hopefully make a video of that as well, so you can see how it's done. But let's just give these a good mix round now. What you can do with this, you can get the flour and the sort of drier starter off the top sides of the jar very easily with this sort of spoon, so you can bring that down and mix that all in. So that's that one done. And it's a very humid day here today. It has been raining overnight and this morning, but the kitchen is very humid indeed, so I'm expecting this to get quite lively later on and come up the sides of the jar again. And it really does smell good. Now, having worked in a bakery in my younger days, I'm well familiar with what the smell of the fresh yeast blocks that we used to buy and use smells like, and this is not too dissimilar at all. It's definitely yeast now, and we can see that by how it came up in the bowl overnight. It's definitely got a culture in there. So we'll just put those. I'm going to close them for the rest of the day. We'll just leave those on the kitchen side and then have a look tomorrow, and it should have come up higher up the jar and we can feed it again. So that's it for now. we'll cut now and come back in, hopefully, I'm going to estimate around 2 hours, 3 hours time for that to be up the top of the Banneton. And then I'll show you how to get it out, hopefully, it'll come out easily. How to score it nicely to get a good sort of open crust as it splits open in the oven. How to dust the excess flour off, and we'll bake it, and then we'll get it out later on and try it and see what it tastes like. So I'll see you later on. Okay, welcome back. It's been around about 3 or 4 hours. I said about the 3 hour mark, but just a little bit longer I've left it. And the dough has come up beautifully. As we very gently take it over here to the top of the proofing basket. So what we're going to do next is turn it out onto this plate with a bit of, I've got some really good quality sort of baking paper here. It's got little dimples on it. That'll make sure it doesn't stick to it in the bottom of the Dutch oven, which is in the oven. It's been preheating in the oven. I've had it on 250 for a long time now. Really get that oven hot, because the dough will spring up and we'll get a nice rise in it with that heat, and then we can turn it down slightly once that's happened, maybe 5 minutes into the baking time. So let's see whether we're going to get this out or not. This is always the tricky part. So just put the baking paper on the plate over the top of your Banneton, and then it's just a question of a quick over and down. Just give it a second to drop away from the basket, and then very gently start to lift, and with a bit of luck you get something like that. Now it may look a bit flat, but that's gonna puff up in the oven, so let's not worry about that. But what I am going to do, as I said, is just brush away a bit of the excess flour, because there is a lot on it, and I'm very gently with a brush, I'm just going to take some of it off, just going around the sort of ring shape that's on the bread, because we have got quite a bit of excess on here, as you can see what's going on to the work surface here, and we don't want that, because that's not going to taste nice when you slice your toast. So we just want to get as much of that off as we can. So you can find these little brushes online. I think I bought this one in a specialist kitchen shop. Didn't cost hardly anything at all. They're washable. Now, we've got quite a good hydrated dough in here, so a bit more hydrated than what I used last time when I made my last loaf. So we're hoping for a good crumb and quite a nice soft loaf. So after I put this in the oven, I'm going to leave you for a bit again, and we'll come back for the final stage where I would have left the loaf to cool, because what I'm intending to do is slice it straight down the middle and show you what's inside, what the crumb looks like, and we'll have a little taste test. But you can't really do that until it's cooled down sufficiently. So once it's baked, I'll take it out of the oven, take it out of the Dutch oven, leave it on a cooling rack, and then we'll have a look inside and see what it's like. So let me just move this to one side, because I'm going to put a board here to just put the Dutch oven on for a moment, which is going to be extremely hot. Now it's been in the oven on 250, getting up to temperature. But before we do that, we're going to do our baker's signature. Now, this is whatever you want to do, really. There's some really intricate designs on the top of sourdough bread, and if you look at some of the groups on social media, you'll see some great things where they've pinched it with scissors, and that's come out in the loaf as it's kicked up and baked in the oven. I just do my standard sort of 3 tears into the top of the loaf, and these expand and open up, give you a nice crust and help the loaf to rise in the oven. If you don't cut it, you're going to get a smooth top, and you're not going to get a kick out of the loaf. It's not going to puff up nice as it hits the heat in the oven, as the yeast gets activated. So It is a good idea to do some sort of cut into the loaf. I use a box cutter, just a cheap box cutter. I find that this gives me quite a good result. So normally I just tear into the loaf 3 times like that, and those will expand and crack and come open. So let me put the oven gloves on, get this Dutch oven out. Which is smoking hot. It's probably going to burn my table, just bear with me one sec. I forgot to put the board down first. Close the oven up while you're doing this last bit, because we don't want to lose that heat out of there now. We want that to get up to temperature. I'm just going to remove the lid because we're not using the lid. I'm not going to bake with the lid on. I've got a little bit of water, cold water, in a sort of glass Pyrex dish that I'm going to put on the very base of the oven. And I'm going to put this in once I put the Dutch oven in, and I'm just going to give it a bit of a shake so that the water comes out and spits over the base of the oven, and this will create a bit of steam. You know, in the bakery trade we have dedicated steam valves that we steam the bread in as we put it into the oven. We need to do the same here. So now it's just a question of very gently lifting this up on the paper and getting it into the Dutch oven as level as you can, and that's it. We'll now put that back in. Put our water in at the bottom. And I'm going to put 30 minutes on the clock. And then I'm going to check it, have a look at it, but it'll probably need the rest of the 10 minutes to cook properly inside. But I'll just make sure that it's not burning. After about 5 minutes now, I'm going to turn this down to around 220 and leave it there for the rest of the baking time. And hopefully we'll have a good loaf out of that to show you in a little while. So we'll see you in a few minutes. We'll see you in a few hours. Hi and welcome back. Well, we're here at last. It's been a long wait for the bread to cool down, but I'm sure it's going to be worth it. So we're going to do nothing but cut it straight down the middle so we can show you the crumb and how it's baked. Now, it didn't rise as much as I was hoping, and I think that was because we were slightly overproofed this morning. My bulk fermentation probably needed to be cut back a bit last night, so we didn't get the oven spring we were looking at, but it's still come out okay. It's still going to be edible. It's still going to be beautiful. It's going to make some cracking toast tomorrow for me. So let's cut it right down the middle, because what I normally do is I freeze half of it, keep it in there, take it out when I need it. The other half I shall eat over the next few days. But let's see what we're looking like inside. It feels a nice light and airy loaf as you're slicing through it. Getting through the base is the hard bit because it's been in the bottom of the Dutch oven, and you really need a sharp bread knife for this. There we go. So let's have a look and see. Well, you can see we've got a nice loaf there. It's not a really tight crumb. There are a few air pockets, but obviously it could have done better than that. And maybe if I'd taken a bit more time in the folding process, I would have got a looser crumb than that, but that's fine. I do actually like it like that. You know, there's nothing worse than having big huge holes for your melted butter to fall through, so that's going to be lovely. So let's take this other half and let's just cut a little wedge off here. It's lovely and fresh. Some butter to go on that. lot on because I do like it. Lovely creamy on there. Just as I thought, it's lovely, it's delicious. Beautiful crust on it. It's really nice and crunchy, but the inside is lovely and soft, airy. Really nice. It's got that beautiful, distinct sourdough flavour. Really comes out, and that's from the starter. That's what's made it taste like that. But that is a beautiful loaf, despite not popping up and splitting as much as I was hoping for. That was really nice. It's really come out well. I'm pleased with that. Now, obviously, I'm going to freeze that half. This half I'll eat over the next couple of days. Normally a loaf, you know, obviously this is a homemade loaf. It's got no preservatives in it like the store-bought breads. So, you know, it's going to be coming to the end of its life after about 3 days. It's suitable for toast after that, but not, you know, for eating as a fresh bread for a sandwich or something like that. But it's not going to stay that long in your house. I'm pretty sure your family, once they smell this bread, it's not going to stay around long. So I wouldn't worry about it getting to that stage. Yeah, have a go at making that. There are loads of videos online. You know, that's where I initially went to find out how to make the starter. But, you know, it really is easy. You've just not got to forget to feed it. And after a while, when you see that it's beginning to double in size and it smells right, you know it's ready to start using. And it's then like baking any other loaf except the time element. But well worth it. So have a go at that. So I hope you liked that video. Bit of a long one, but you know, give it a thumbs up if you liked it, a thumbs down if you didn't. Leave a comment in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you all. And you know, I'll see you next time.